Number 1. The Drive. This happened about 30 years ago when I was in my early 20s. Back then I lived in a very rural area. It was not easy to find jobs at the time, especially in the area that I lived in. It was outside of a very small town, which had long since died out. Most of the businesses in the small town had closed down, and the few jobs that actually did exist in town were filled, and it was impossible to even find a job at the local McDonald's. I was able, thanks to a friend, to find a job in a factory eventually. However, it wasn't the most ideal job in the world due to a couple of things. First, it was a third shift job, and I wasn't used to working overnight. And that wasn't so bad though, compared to the fact that it was nearly an hour-and-a-half drive in order to get to and from the job. However, it paid decently, and I really needed the work, so I took the job. I was able to take turns driving with my buddy, who got me the job, so that saved us gas money, which really wasn't too terrible at the time anyway. Now, the job itself might be the setting for a pretty scary story. I mean, it was a factory, and it didn't do production during the third shift. There were a few maintenance workers there, and a few security guards. I was a security guard. Other than that, the huge factory was largely dark and empty. But that's not where the scary story took place, though. Me and my buddy Tony had been driving to work 5 days a week for several months, through the summer. When the story took place, we had to get to the factory and signed in and everything by midnight, so we tended to leave before 10 p.m. It was a fall day, and it was a very rural drive to the factory. To set the scene, it was chilly outside. Leaves were falling from the trees pretty heavily, and although it wasn't raining hard or anything, it was misty and very damp outside. This day, Tony was driving me to work in his old pickup truck. It was a really small and old Isuzu truck, so not anything special. Usually the roads were pretty dead, and a long portion of the drive was through the hills. But after a short period of time, we realized that there was a car behind us. It wasn't a big deal, it was just unusual. However, the guy kept switching his lights from his regular beams to his high beams every now and then. And after having the high beams on for a few moments, he would put them back to normal. Well, since Tony was driving, this was annoying him a lot more than it was annoying me. And after a while he got sick of it, and he hit the brakes on his car. This caused the car, which had been following us for quite a while at this point, to also hit its brakes, and we heard it slipping a little bit on the slick roads. Tony was pretty happy with himself. Still, it didn't do any good. The car continued following us and continued occasionally flipping back and forth from his regular beams to his high beams and back again. Tony was getting annoyed, but I convinced him not to go and hit his brakes again. The road was too slippery, and I didn't want to take the chance that either us or him would skid off the road. I'm not sure how long that car followed us through the hills, when something really weird happened. Some lights in the car began flashing on and off. This was a regular car, not a police car, and the lights were white, not red and blue, but they were flashing from the front and the back of the inside of the car, like they were police lights. And the car also began flashing his high beams on and off again, very quickly. Tony wasn't sure what to do, but we decided, just in case the guy was an unmarked cop car, that we should pull over. If he wasn't an unmarked cop car, maybe he would just drive around us, and it would be the end of this annoying encounter. Well, Tony pulled the truck over, and the other car pulled over as well. This time he kept his high beams on, plus the white lights were still flashing in his car. I was convinced, though, that this wasn't a police car, and that the lights were simply strobe lights. The whole thing seemed weird, and it made no sense that if this guy was a cop, that any of his behavior would have ever occurred. The driver got out of the car and began walking over to our truck. I was watching him closely from the back window of the cab of the little truck, and it happened for just a moment too. I saw that the man was holding what looked like a rifle, and he was holding it like he was going to fire it in the immediate future. I hit Tony's arm. "That's not a cop," I told him. "Drive away now." Tony looked confused, but I told him to hurry. He put the car in drive and began pulling away from the side of the street. Almost immediately we heard a shot fired from the rifle of that man. We both severely flinched, worried about getting hit, but we seemed okay. Tony then hit the gas, and even though that little old truck didn't have much power to it, we took off right away. I kept watching out of the back window. I kept expecting to see the car with its high beams and its flashing lights to follow us. I was sure it wasn't a cop, but if it was, he would absolutely begin following us. However, after we had lost sight of the car, we didn't see it following us again after that. We knew for sure then that it was definitely not a cop car. We just kept driving to work after that. We didn't know what to do, really. We didn't see the point in reporting it to the police. We had almost no information on the vehicle, so we didn't know how it would do any good. So instead, we just kept driving and went to work as usual. Tony and I never found out anything about what happened that night, but being fired at, even though the truck hadn't been hit, was a very scary experience. We never experienced anything like that ever again. Number 2. Quarry. My brother and I used to work security at this really old quarry. I never really quite understood the job, to tell you the truth. If you had seen the quarry at any time during the day, you would have just assumed it was abandoned. It truly came across that way. There was no real work being done there, except once in a really great while. However, there were always 2 security guards who were always there in the morning and overnight. There was a period of time, though, from about 6 p.m. until the 2 of us arrived at 8 p.m., that there was no one at the quarry at all. So my brother Travis and I were headed into work that evening. It was a hot summer day, and we weren't totally looking forward to work. It consisted of us mainly sitting in a small building all night that wasn't air-conditioned, and sometimes walking around the quarry to make sure there were no intruders, though I never understood why anybody would break into the place and steal the bunch of nothing that was there. We got to work a little bit before 8 p.m., and we noticed something really strange. The entrance gates were wide open. We had had them unlocked before. The daytime security guards were not the greatest workers in the world, but this was the first time that we had seen them wide open. But we didn't think too much about it, really. We drove in, got out, and he closed the gates up and locked them. After we settled in, Travis liked to go ahead and do a sweep of the quarry before it got too dark outside. I let him do it, and I went and got things settled in the building. It was maybe 20 minutes later when Travis came running into the door of the building. He was very flustered and winded, and I wasn't sure at first what was wrong with him. When he was finally able to breathe, he told me that he had just found a dead body out in the quarry. He said it also looked like it had been killed very recently. Travis was pretty freaked out, so I asked him where the body was. I told him to go ahead and call the police, and then to call our boss and let him know. I was going to go out and check out the body for myself. By this point, it was definitely getting pretty dark out. I took my flashlight and began to head out in the area that he had found the body at. When I got there, I began shining my flashlight around. It was dark, but I caught the body pretty quickly. However, when I did, there was a person crouched over the body. I only saw the person very clearly for one moment, but he looked like he was going through the body's pockets. When my flashlight hit him, he took off pretty quickly out of the area. Yes, I was a security guard, but I had no idea what to do. I had a gun, but I wasn't about to shoot the intruder, even if he was a killer. I wasn't a cop, and I knew I could get into a lot more trouble shooting at someone, whether the person was a suspected murderer or not. I decided to chase after the figure. I hadn't gotten a good look at the dead body, so I didn't know for sure how he'd been killed. I just hoped that the figure that I was chasing didn't have a gun. If he didn't, that would be the best advantage that I had. I ran in the direction and realized that he was running for the fence. He had a head start on me, and he was a bit faster than I was. He got to the fence and began climbing over it before I got there. By the time I got another glimpse of him, he'd already gotten to the top of the fence. Having the flashlight shined on him again seemed to catch him off guard, and he almost fell off the other side of the fence. However, he caught himself, jumped off, and then ran off into the night. I wasn't about to jump the gate and chase the guy, though. It was one thing for me to be patrolling within the fence where I worked, but this guy also would have been long gone before I could have gotten my ass over that fence. I went back to the gate of the road and waited for the police to arrive. It did take them quite a while to get there, and I was sure that the guy who I had chased off was way far off by that point. I was able to give the police a pretty bad description of who I saw. I had a few glimpses of him, but they weren't for very long. Travis, on the other hand, hadn't seen the possible killer at all. The scariest part for my brother, however, was apparently the body had been killed right around the time that he went on his patrol. The police theorized that since the killer had come back to the body after my brother left, that my brother must have gotten there right after the murder and scared the guy off. The man was killed with a knife, so the killer might have been scared if he knew that we had guns. Travis was quite shaken by what he was told, but he tried his best to just brush it off. The experience had shaken us both enough that we couldn't keep working at the quarry. We didn't want to be there in case the guy decided to come back, and maybe with others. Number 3. Troy. I grew up in a house way out in the middle of nowhere. I really didn't care for it too much, and I currently live in the city. Although I guess for the most part it is more dangerous than the city, and I like it a lot more. The area I lived in was called Greasy Ridge, and it was in southern Ohio. Our house was alone on top of a hill. My closest friends lived down the hill, which would take about 20 minutes to walk down the road and to get to their house. The school bus that would take us to school would take about an hour and 15 minutes to get us there. Although I wasn't really always happy living out in the country like that, the best thing about it compared to the city was that it was relatively safe. I mean, we left our doors unlocked all the time. It really wasn't something that we normally thought about. When I was 14 years old, my parents and my younger sister were going to go visit family across the river in West Virginia. Normally that meant my cousin would be watching my sister while all the parents went out drinking. That meant there was no telling when they would be getting back, so I decided to stay home instead. I figured I would just watch some TV or movies by myself. It was pretty late at night when I was sitting on the sofa watching television. Our living room faced the front of the house. We had a very big picture window facing the front of the house. Our driveway was also pretty long. It was probably close to 11 p.m. when I saw a car pull into our driveway and begin making its way up to the house. Now I doubted this was my parents. There was no way they'd be coming back this early on a drinking night. but other than that, I had no idea who it could be. When it got closer, I was able to see that it was a pickup truck. Two big older guys got out of it and began walking up to the door. I went and met them at the door. They asked me if someone named Troy was at the house. I told them that no one with that name lived there. Almost immediately, the guys began getting angry with me. They told me that I was lying and that they knew Troy was at home. How dare I lie to them and tell them that Troy didn't live there? Now, I was a 14-year-old country boy, so I didn't like anyone speaking to me like that. I got angry and told them that no one with that name fucking lived here and to get the hell off my fucking property. Okay, even at age 14, I should have known that was a stupid thing to do. I hadn't opened the screen door of the house, and one of the guys began reaching for the handle. I quickly then shut the front door, locked and bolted it. The two guys pounded on the door and were demanding me to open it up for a few moments. I simply told them to go fuck themselves. Looking out the window, I saw them walk away from the door. They went walking back to their truck, and I at first expected them to get in and drive away, but they didn't. They grabbed some huge object from the bed of the truck, and then began walking back toward the house. I wasn't really scared, but I was somewhat concerned. They were some big and scary-looking guys. I began closing the drapes on the picture window, but before I could get the drapes all the way closed, the big object came crashing through the window. I only had a few moments to think, and I did it as quickly as I could. I figured that the two men were going to try and come through the window, so I ran quickly into my dad's room. My dad was really old-school country. He kept his shotgun at all times in his bedroom loaded. He had taught me to use it from a really young age, so I knew that I had that gun to protect me with. I grabbed the gun and I ran into the living room. The guys were both in there and one of them had a baseball bat, but I, of course, had the boomstick. "Where's Troy?" one of them asked before seeing the gun in my hands. They immediately both took a step back. "Get the fuck out of my house before I mount your head on my wall," I told them, pointing the gun at them. "You ain't gonna shoot," one of them began before I pulled the trigger, although I shot past them as a warning. They both took my warning seriously and fled out the window. Rather than going to the window, I went over to the front door and opened it. I went out on the porch. I was first worried that they might go and get a gun out of their truck, but they didn't. They got into the truck and began pulling out. Being the so-called tough guys that they probably considered themselves to be, they began yelling threats as they pulled out. Another shot from the shotgun silenced their asses. I couldn't get in touch with my parents, and it took the police a while to get there. I gave them good descriptions. I knew both cops as I went to school with their younger siblings. They found my story hilarious, and I actually got mad respect from them for doing what I did. In fact, they told their siblings to spread it around school, and I was pretty popular for a while. The two guys were found, but they were just warned, not arrested. This was not really unusual for the area that we lived in, but they did have to pay to get the window replaced, and were told that if they didn't, they would let my dad deal with them any way he wanted to. Troy was actually some guy who lived out on the ridge, I found out. I never knew him, though. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. Hope you enjoyed this video. In the future, I'm going to do a country-themed video every single Wednesday if I can. Now, while I want to have a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday schedule, I probably won't have a video up this Friday. I'll probably put it up on Saturday instead. I have a couple things I'll be doing on Friday that might make it hard for me to get a video out, so I just want to let you know that. But also keep in mind, from now on, Wednesdays will be Country Story Wednesdays. As always, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please hit the subscribe button and the bell, so you can be notified of future videos. Share the video with someone you think might like it, and leave me a comment to let me know what you think. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.